So, in this video, I want to talk about the 4 shades of the Primordial One, but mainly about the Shade of Life, who was mentioned in the latest Archon quest called Paralogism, which is a place where I would normally never expect something like this to be talked about at all, but here we are. So I tried to summarize all the information we have about these so-called shades, talk about a bit of history of Teyvat as a whole, and then focus on the new reveal. But first there is a disclaimer as always. This is just my interpretation of the lore. I don't look at leaks, so I can only use the information that's official and speculate about the rest. If you want to correct me or add something, please tell me in the comments down below. So, we first read about these shades in the forbidden text called Before Sun and Moon, which at that time became the basis for all the lore available to us. This book, together with some of the new artifact sets and other sources, is the best source for the beginning of Teyvat. Well, as you maybe know, at the start, in the very distant past, Teyvat was inhabited mainly by dragons, who were ruled by these 7 dragon sovereigns, but mainly the Dragon King Nibelung, who was supposedly born together with Teyvat and pledged to take his people toward the stars, and thus save them from their impending end. But then the Primordial One, aka Phanes, was born and arrived to Teyvat. Well, nowadays that being is known as the Heavenly Principles that resides in Celestia. When the Primordial One arrived, he battled these dragon sovereigns and defeated them, with Nibelung probably escaping at some point only to later return together with the forbidden knowledge, but that's not relevant right now. The Primordial One then created 4 shining shades of itself, which correspond to the artifacts we can find in our inventories, and their specific types. There is the Flower of Life, which represents the Shade of Life, aka the Ruler of Life, the Plume of Death, representing the Shade or Ruler of Death, the Sense of Eon, that can also be called the Sense of Time, and thus represent the Shade, aka the Ruler of Time, and there is the Goblet of Eonotum, which basically considering everything means something like space or void, so it represents the Shade of Space. So you have the Shade of Time, Space, Life and Death, and then there is the Circle of Logos, which should correspond to the Primordial One. There are some theories that involve the presumption that the Primordial One is one of the shades, but for this video I work with the, in my opinion, more likely theory of there being 4 shades and the Primordial One as a separate entity. Well, of these 4 shades, we now know the identities of 3. I'll start with the Shade of Time, who is also called Istaroth, the Thousand Winds of Time, God of Moments, the Undying Wind, Tokyo Okami or Kairos, depending on who you ask. This is the shade that was first revealed to us along with the information that even mentioned the existence of such beings, but nowadays we don't know as much about her. In the distant past, she has been worshipped in ancient Mondstadt and Enkanomiya, even before the institution of the Seven was established. Nowadays, though, she has been long forgotten, but we can still see some of the remains of her worship in, for example, the Thousand Winds Temple, or the whole region of Enkanomiya, really. Well, after the new order of the Primordial One was established, Istaroth and the other shades ruled alongside him. But after some time, the second who came arrived on Teyvat, and the war was rekindled once again. During this time, Enkanomiya sank beneath the sea and was completely cut off from the rest of the world. Even after the war ended, the only one who didn't forsake the people of Enkanomiya was Istaroth. Before Venti obtained his power and became the Archon of Anemo, he was described as a single thread of the Thousand Winds that roared through the northern lands, which heavily implies that Venti is connected to Istaroth and may even be a part of her being. This is further supported by the fact that both of them were worshipped in Mondstadt alongside each other until Istaroth was eventually forgotten. We also know that Istaroth has some sort of dealings with Makoto, the first Electro Archon, and helped her get the seed of the sacred Sakura into the past to help her sister Abe plant it, which later helped Inazuma to be saved. The next shade I want to talk about is Ronova, aka the Shade of Death. She is actually probably the one we know the most about, since there was a major focus on her throughout the Natlan Archon quests. When the Primordial One and the second who came fought, the region of Natlan suffered and the ley lines of Natlan sustained severe damage. After the war, Ronova led the Lord of the Night in the reconstruction of the ley lines, and together they turned them into the Night Kingdom. But this act greatly displeased the Primordial One, and she later succumbed to self-pity, as the Lord of the Night calls it, which caused her to no longer be interested in the fate of Natlan. There is one more important connection to Natlan she has. In the past, she made a deal with Xabalanque, the first Pyro Archon. Some say that it happened after he already ascended the Divine Throne and became the first Pyro Archon, but Kukulkan, or the Sage of the Stolen Flame, implies that she has likely been in contact with Xabalanque even before that. Because when he killed Pyro Sovereign Xuquoatl, he died together with him, but he then later rose from the flames, which makes it seem like he already had some sort of deal with Renova, even at that point in time. Anyway, after he became the first Pyro Archon, he negotiated with Renova and established the rules of Natlan, which involves the Oath of Resurrection and the Pilgrimage. This also means that everyone who becomes the Pyro Archon receives the knowledge from the previous Archons, and so they become stronger with every generation. And there is also a possibility to use Renova's power when certain conditions are met, but their deal also included the condition that the person who uses Renova's power must pay a price with death. She said that if the Heavenly Principles were to find out about this, then she would deny this and claim that the treacherous Xbalanque stole her power. Xbalanque also made a bet of sorts with her, which was that if Natlan prevails and defeats the Abyss, he would be given a chance to return and see it for himself, which happened in Mavika's story quest as we all know. Now outside of Natlan, we know that during the Cataclysm in Khaenri'ah, it was Renova who cursed the Khaenri'ans with the Curse of Immortality. She did this despite most Khaenri'ans having nothing to do with the calamity, which is also the reason why Capitano sought revenge for his people. We even got to meet Renova at the very end of the Natlan Archon quest, where she tried to get the prize for Mavika's use of her power, but was faced with Capitano's paradox and had to make a choice to forsake this rule. Now let's talk about the Shade of Life, which was recently revealed to be called Naberius. Well, after the Primordial One defeated the dragons and seized their authority, Naberius was the one responsible for helping the Primordial One create animals, plants and supposedly even humans. She then fought alongside the other shades against the second who came, when the war was rekindled, and after that, we know that she possessed the power that previously belonged to the Hydra Dragon, which is the power of the Primordial Sea. The Hydra Dragon supposedly functioned as the Primordial Sea's heart, and so she created Egeria to serve as the new heart, and we all know that Egeria later became the first Archon. Now in the recent Archon quest, Albedo revealed to us that his master Reindaughter, aka Gold, who is also one of the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah, discovered the heart of Naberius. After she discovered it, she disappeared and left Albedo in Mondstadt to find the truth of this war, while she devoured the heart and even managed to fuse with Naberius. This information is absolutely crazy, and I personally have yet to fully grasp the consequences of this piece of knowledge, since we know that the power these 4 shades possess is on a completely different level than ordinary gods, or even the dragon sovereigns. I mean, the Shade of Life should by all means have the absolute authority over life in Teyvat. Even though there are definitely some limits to this, I don't think we should underestimate the power of this entity. And now, one of the 5 sinners, who is basically in love with the power of the Abyss, became one with the Shade of Life. This by the way explains how she was able to create so many other creations besides Albedo, like Rift Hounds during Elenas, although we don't really know if she was fused with Naberius at that point in time, hard to say. But Alice also mentions that she had some sort of material she used for creation in the past, and there is not much left of it, so maybe this fusion is kind of a newer event. Anyway, it fits her theme perfectly, since she is a master of the Khaenri'an alchemical art of chemia and the creation of life, and now that we know that she obtained such power, it really seems like nothing can stand in her way. She was already a transcendent being, if we take Dainsleif's sword for it, and now she even has the power over life itself. I can only imagine how furious the Primordial One will be once they wake up, since we know that they have been asleep ever since the Cataclysm in Khaenri'ah, and now one of these very Khaenri'ans, who supposedly caused the Cataclysm, fused with one of its shining shades. And the Shade of Life in particular seems extremely important. A little speculation I have about the shades is that each of these shades has a certain authority that only they can use. Like how the ruler of death seems to be able to straight up cause someone to be immortal and control death as a whole. So I think that the ruler of life could have the authority over creation, because it was her who played a huge part in the recreation of Teyvat and its ecosystem, and she also created Egeria, which means that she at the very least had the authority to create life, which as we know thanks to Fontaine and such, Celestia is very serious about. So I don't know what exactly this information implies, but I know that this has to be of a huge importance sometime in the future, maybe once the Heavenly Principles finally awaken and we confront them. I don't know if Reindaughter has any connection to the Abyss Order, and I don't think she does, but this could play a huge role in their plan to overthrow the Heavenly Principles, if they had one of the shades kinda on their side. Also, the Abyss is like the #1 enemy of the Heavenly Principles, so I have no idea how that kind of power, or even existence that is heavily influenced by the Abyss, can be fused with something directly connected to the Primordial One, but maybe we will find that out in a future quest. And that gets me to the last shade, the supposed Shade of Space, which we know basically nothing about. I just wanted to mention that even the fact that it's a Shade of Space is kind of a speculation, since we really know nothing. Well, besides the fact that there is supposed to be one other shade. A lot of people speculate that she could be the goddess we see at the very start of the game, but honestly who knows, I certainly don't. Anyway, that will be it for this short video. I hope you enjoyed it and that I didn't disappoint you too much with how much yapping there was about the other stuff instead of the new information. But without the context, there just isn't much to say about Naberius, so please forgive me for that. But with that out of the way, take care and I'll see you in the next one.